loud. Okay. So welcome everybody, to those who are here and also those that are watching on the replay. It's exciting to get to teach this today because I learned a very powerful reframe for panic that for me was a game changer in how I think about it, how I relate to anxiety, how I like to work with it in general with clients, as a complement to the other ways that I look at anxiety. And I'm going to share that with you. And the first thing that I want to do is to normalize kind of the idea of what anxiety and panic are. And I happen to have just gotten off a call a little while ago with somebody who was, a couple people in, to somebody who was looking for support with a fear of public speaking, who has panic attacks when he has to do public speaking. And so I finished that call, and then I'm racing around getting ready for this meeting. And I even went and I had some sugar because I'm like, okay, I'm getting pumped up for this talk and, racing around doing stuff. And I realized my heart was racing and, I felt, just this kind of amplified sense of my nervous system. And I'm like, wow, this is the exact same kinds of symptoms that we get when you have anxiety or panic attacks that get really scary. And it can also be really normal, a normal way of just getting into this state of high alert and ready to launch into action, with this heightened state of being able to activate our inner resources. So that's not the reframe, but I was just reflecting on that because I'm like, wow, technically I could say that this was like panic, but it's not. It's all excitement and getting amped up for the performance for the talk. Hi, Lisa. I see your camera's off. Just wanted to say hi.
Hello. Yep, just getting sorted out here before I get my camera on. So
Yeah,
I'm
so
sorted now.
awesome. Welcome, welcome. Good to see
Good to
you.
see you.
So, so the reframe that I want to share with you, first of all, get my little notes out. So I was really struck by an article that I read by a fellow hypnotist who was talking about how he works with clients. And he said that, it's really a cruel label that we use for panic attacks, that we call them that because panic attack is like a metaphor that it's nothing is being attacked. And the people that it's used for are anxious. And it's just like when you're anxious and you think about being attacked, it's like even more intense. And so when that label sticks, it just adds to this sense of something scary and something fearful that's happening. But in a sense, this is actually something that the body does really normally at other times. And I want I want you to reflect for a moment. And I know that some people who take this workshop are also, maybe they have anxiety, maybe they had panic attacks a long time ago, maybe it's not current. So I just want to say that this is an opportunity to learn something so that if it were to happen again, or if you know people that it happens to, you might be able to understand the symptoms a little bit better. So, first of all, has everybody here had the experience of exerting yourself to the point where your heart was pounding and you were breathing heavily and you had to take a little time to recover? So it could happen anytime, right? I mean, certainly if we're at the gym and we're running on a treadmill, or, I had an experience where I was catching a flight and I was meandering my way through the airport trying to make it to a gate that it turns out was a lot further away than I expected. And by the time I realized I was going to miss my flight, I'm like sprinting through the airport. And I was taking an international flight, and I finally got to the gate, and I was like the last person to arrive. They were basically holding the plane for me. And the flight attendant was there, and she's like, "Are you Denise Dempsey?" I'm like, "Yes." And she's asking for my passport, and I'm fumbling through my stuff. And she's like, "Just get on." But I couldn't speak. I'm like trying to be all calm and getting to my seat, but it's like I was still breathing heavily. And and I just had to like slow down my breathing because I felt even self-conscious for like how out of shape I was at the time. But what do we do in those kind of situations, right? It's clearly not an emergency. Maybe we're a little out of shape or something, but that could even happen to a super fit Olympic athlete where you see them, running down the track and they finally make it to the finish line and they're like, they're breathing heavily. They're like you could see it in their whole posture. They're recovering. And in the worst kind of panic attacks, the worst of those, this is the kind of thing the body's going through. Is the heart is pounding, we're breathing heavily, we're sweating, the palms are sweating. Sometimes people get tunnel vision, feel like they're not able to think clearly because the brain is not getting the resources aren't needed to like do this fine calculation about something. It's just in reaction mode. It's just physical. It's just really trying to run. And so how do we respond in these situations where we've exerted ourselves when it's not an emergency? I mean, if anybody feels like either saying it out loud or putting it in the chat, what I usually do is I just wait. I just wait for things to regulate themselves. And when it's a panic attack, sometimes people will even go to the ER. Maybe this has happened to you. The ER sees a lot of people with panic attacks because it can feel so intense. It can just feel so intense. And so what this hypnotist was saying is the reframe is you're not having a panic attack. Your body just thinks it's exercising. It's an inappropriate exercise response. And when I heard that, inappropriate exercise response, it just flipped things for me because it it almost felt humorous to me that my body feels like it's working out when it's just sitting here. Or think about, if you happen to be the kind of person that watches scary movies, which I am not. I do not do that just for fun anyway. And the whole audience is sitting there completely, petrified, in unison. And I'd be willing to bet if you had like heart monitors and stuff on people, their hearts would be racing and they'd be sweating. And so it's so interesting that the same symptoms can relate to these times when there's actually nothing going on. So I was working with a little girl with a fear of flying not too long ago who'd had a panic attack on a plane once, and now she was terrified of flying. And when I walked her through this metaphor of the inappropriate exercise response, it was like, wow, it suddenly felt not so dangerous. Because when we call it a panic attack, it sounds dangerous, doesn't it? I mean, it does to me. And that's the whole thing that will often perpetuate this cycle of fear of having another one because they feel dangerous. And then the more that we try to, organize our life to avoid these kinds of situations, our lives become smaller and smaller. And we start to avoid doing things like taking a trip to someplace that we really want to get to, which is why she was working with me, is she really wanted to do something. She had to take a plane to do it. And she just knew that she was sabotaging herself. So So that was pretty cool to get to help her. But so this is a powerful reframe, and I would love to right now have you do this with me, where I just want you to close your eyes, if you will, and just think of a time. Like I was just describing the time that I was on the plane and having that experience, you know, racing for the gate so I didn't miss my flight. And just think of a time when it was somewhat normal circumstances. Maybe you were at the gym, maybe you were working out, maybe you were gardening, maybe you were doing something else that was just physically got your heart rate up. And you might even have to think back to like even when you were a kid, those times where you're just running, and what it's like to feel your body just get activated like that. And then when you finally can stop, let's see if you can remember what it's like in that situation. How there's just this slowly returning back to balanced state. Sometimes you slow yourself down with some slower breaths. It's just very natural. Like we start to self-regulate. What that's like to know how to self-regulate that way. And as you do this, you might even start to notice yourself taking a deeper breath in. So those kinds of experiences, the fast breathing, sweating, racing heart, that all can characterize a panic attack, would all be perfectly natural if you're running at the gym or doing something very physical. So go ahead and open your eyes and let yourself re-emerge from that fantasy. So could you call that up, a time in the past when you had that kind of an experience? And I would love if you yourself have had episodes of panic, what you would call panic, even if they're different than what I've described. I'd love it if you would put what your symptoms are like in the chat so that I can see if there's differences in the kinds of ways that people experience panic, because there was actually a time when I used to experience, I my anxiety was really actually quite disabling, but it wasn't panic attacks. It wasn't, it was kind of more of uh, an overwhelming sense of, well, just, I don't even know how to explain it, actually. It's hard to put it into words, which is how these things are sometimes. Yeah, so heart racing, overwhelming fear. Yeah, fear is fear and crying. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, highly relatable. Tunnel vision, sweating, hot. Yep, we're definitely hitting all there's some of those key, and the emotional response too. I mean, of course, we wouldn't probably be crying if we were an Olympic athlete, crossing the finish line, although I'm sure there have been some tears. But these experiences can be very emotional, And often they are tied to circumstances or events that are overwhelming and would probably be overwhelming if the panic feelings weren't there. Like it's not like it's dependent on the symptoms. And like a switch is suddenly flipped, shallow breathing, more and more fear, heart palpitations, chest tightness. Yeah. Yeah, it's understandable why having these kinds of things happen, especially out of the blue. I think it might even be a little easier if we knew it was tied to a specific scary event going on. But when they happen out of the blue, which often for people who have, repetitive panic attacks, that's kind of how it happens, which is why then people start, um, our worlds can start to become smaller and smaller, just trying to avoid those situations, which is really unfortunate. So, if anybody has any questions related to what I have said already too, please feel free to put it in the chat. And I do have some things that I want to teach you that can be great resources for working with panic. One type of panic attack is fear-based, and the other one is out of the blue. Yep. The fear-based is easier to work with than out of the blue. Yeah, I would imagine so, because there's actually something that you can take action on or that you can address. Am I guessing correctly? Yeah. So how does that land for you? If you think of it, if like, I don't know any of your, how you guys relate to this in your personal life, but imagine what it would be like. What I tell people I work with who come to see me for panic attacks, who come for hypnosis for panic attacks, is they use that terminology. I have panic attacks. I'm coming to see you to help me with my panic attacks. And that goes on and on and on, even when they're feeling better, referring to panic attacks. And so I've had people, like that little girl that was working with me, I said, I want you to stop using the words panic attacks now. And I want you to say, I'm having an inappropriate exercise response. And she loved that. And we actually came up with an abbreviation for it because that is kind of a mouthful. But I think part of it is part of the way it can be helpful is that it sounds kind of funny to even say it, like I'm having and it starts to be, you start to kind of almost see like, wow, my body is doing this thing right now. Um, and as I'm saying this, I'm just reflecting on the way that panic is actually kind of its own beast, different than, say, chronic anxiety. I think chronic anxiety can be a lot more complex. And like I was just reflecting on the anxiety that I used to live with years ago in my 20s, that was quite debilitating, which didn't involve panic and yet was extremely, difficult to manage. So that's, I think, a lot more complex because the symptoms are different and some of them are emotional and psychological. But with panic, we're looking at a very physical kind of experience. And that's why I think the reframe can make a difference in like helping us to reframe what are these symptoms that are happening in my body. And I've even thought about it a few times when I've been in some situations where I started to feel anxious, can't remember what it was. It wasn't an extreme kind of situation like a panic attack. But I was just noticing how my body was kind of revving up when it didn't need to. It didn't need to be activating to that degree. And I think the more that mindful that we are about that kind of thing, the more likely we're going to be able to support ourselves with the kinds of things that we do. And so I want to, let's see if there's something else. Yeah. So yeah, is there a difference between panic attacks and high anxiety? And I think, it really does come down to the nature of the physical symptoms, that go with it, where a panic attack will usually involve these states of really high hyperarousal of the nervous system, to the point that, people think that there's got to be something wrong, medically. Nobody wants to go to the ER, in the middle of the night, it's never convenient. And so it's really scary. But high anxiety is its own thing too. And I think that there is overlap between them for sure. But, like having a panic attack disorder or panic disorder, where it's actually called a disorder, at times, that if you have that kind of a history, you could have high anxiety about it that could limit your life, even when you're not having a panic attack or inappropriate exercise response. It's like the fear of the panic. And a lot of people relate to that, like when people have taken the mindfulness-based stress reduction class with me, and many people with anxiety come to that. And in fact, most people who have stress have some degree of anxiety. They kind of go together. Where was my mind going with that? I can't remember now what I was going to say. This is like public speaker's worst nightmare, when you lose your train of thought. And I've just kind of understand it as like there's like this log jam of things that I'm trying to remember to say. And sometimes I just lose track of a log, it's just like, wait, where did that one go? So I'm sure it'll come back. And if there was something that I was in the middle of saying and I missed it, just let me know. But I think I was maybe saying something tangential. I'm in a safe place. Thank you. Yeah, I'm with my people. So let's do something right now. I am so intrigued with all the ways that there are that we can regulate our nervous system. I mean, I taught and still at times teach mindfulness-based stress reduction since 2003. So it's been like 22, 23 years now. And there's still more to learn. Like, mindfulness meditation, it's just phenomenal for being able to support ourselves, to self-regulate. We spend a number of weeks just on the body scan, and that, mindfulness of the body, that, getting connected to that feedback loop so that we can respond instead of react on autopilot. And so there's all these other ways that we can support ourselves as well. And in fact, that might be one of the things that we would adjust with the MBSR curriculum, as wonderful as it is like, okay, well, when we are responding, when we are choosing to respond instead of react, what do we do? What do we choose to do in those moments? Because, there's other things to do besides meditation, but that would have to be like MBSR 2 or something. So there's many different things we can do. And there's also techniques that have been built around these things. There's overlaps between these techniques. So like hypnosis and EMDR and emotional freedom technique, tapping. And there's something called havening that I've been wanting to learn more about. But one of them is to just put your arms across one another and just start to tap. left, right, left, right, left, right. And I'll just let you tap for a minute. You can even close your eyes as you do this and notice the effect it has on your nervous system. So, I'm in this state of hyperarousal, just, speaking, doing this workshop. And I can feel like while I was doing that, I felt my heart rate start to slow down. Do you notice that? You guys notice any of that? That's really cool. That's really cool because I'm in a place, in an action where I actually kind of like need to stay alert and, kind of activated in a way. My inner resources are going. And so this actually feels like something that you can do while you're still like being alert and attending to things. Like, don't have to kind of get into that quiet meditative state. You can still be. And if I saw somebody do this in public, I think I would think that they were impatient with me. Like if I was talking to somebody and they started doing this, I think I might just think that they were a little impatient. So if you're standing in line doing something out in public, somebody might just think you're bored. You're just bored and or annoyed by something. But that feels really cool. I think I'm definitely going to do that one more. I'm always learning. I feel like I have so many things to try out that I don't get to do enough. So this other one is also really cool. And so what we're going to do now is just keep your head facing straight ahead. Don't move your head and just turn your eyes, look to the right, just with your eyes. Just look to the right and hold your gaze there until you notice yourself either take a deep breath or yawn. And then we'll do it on the other side. Just keeping your head facing straight, so don't turn your head. Just look with your eyes now to the left, or whenever you're ready. You don't even have to look at anything in particular, but just really kind of like stretching the muscles there of the eyes. So I'm noticing my heart feels like it's slowed down. It's not beating as fast. Does anybody else notice that? If you tune in and you notice how your body feels, you're noticing that. So this is, what is it called? It's a vagus nerve reset. And it actually is drawing on something, the oculocardiac reflex, which we engage when we stretch the eyeballs like that, where there's actually a message that gets sent to the vagus nerve that then sends this parasympathetic signal to the heart that slows the heart rate down. And so it's a physiological effect that apparently, like when they're doing eye surgeries and stuff, they actually watch for that, because if they're doing something where they're sort of like engaging that artificially, it could actually have an effect on the heart rate and stuff of the patient that they're operating on. But that's like an extreme situation. We could take advantage of that oculocardiac reflex. And I don't know if this is even the kind of natural setting where we might do this, but I personally have used this one just to try it on my own at times, and I find that it really does. I really do notice the feeling of the yawn or I naturally take a breath. Would you guys mind writing in the chat whether you noticed yourself either yawning or taking a breath? Mhm. Breathing deeper. And, since I'm bigger breath to the right and yawning to the left. Interesting. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so you had just taken a deep breath. So that's cool. You guys noticed that. Um, so, when we have the symptoms, anxiety symptoms, even short of panic, I think regulating the nervous system is just something we could all use, like an opportunity to downshift in the midst of a busy day where there's some wear and tear that comes on the body with, the kind of work that we do or family situations or, you know, any media sources that you engage with, any stress that arises. I think the more that we regulate the nervous system, the better for our body to just keep that, keep our resilience. And the other thing that I would love to do with you is related to stimulating these points on the body that are in traditional Chinese medicine are on what they call the kidney meridian. And these points apparently relate to stress and fear. So by tapping on them, we're engaging these energy circuits that help to balance that so that, if you're having fear symptoms, that it calms the body. And these points are just below the collarbones. So like we've all got collarbones. And if you feel under the collarbones, about an inch and a half out from the notch and down, there's like a little indentation, like right underneath there. And I've heard people say that it's tender. Mine is not tender to me. If I really felt around for a while, maybe it would be tender, and so just tapping on those points and acupuncturists use these little fine needles and to just make sure that we hit the right points. I've heard it helps to just use a bunch of fingers. So you could just use all your fingers and just tapping. And when I tap on this point, I almost always find myself taking a deep breath. And you can even experiment with tapping lightly or tapping with some pressure. I personally find that it feels sort of satisfying to use more pressure when I'm tapping here. And go ahead, if you would, and write in the chat something about your experience with this. I'm actually wearing the right shirt for this. I'm not wearing a big bulky sweater or something, which it seems like I'm always wearing when I try to demo these things. So you notice that it feels calming, great. Yeah, between the bilateral stimulation to the eye, the oculocardio reflex to the tapping kidney, what is the kidney 27, which is just means the 27th point on the kidney meridian. Can help bring the body out of the fight, flight, or freeze state. I know a lot of people relate to the freeze state when it comes to that fight or flight. I know what that's like myself, to get a frozen mode. It's what I call it when I'm just dealing with some stress or whatever, and I realize that I'm just being very still. Maybe you can relate to that as well. So, you know, fight or flight is not always an activated physically state. Sometimes we become even much more um, not wanting to move. So regardless, using these different, see, the problem with teaching MBSR when I do the yoga with people or do meditation, or now apparently doing demos of this sympathetic, parasympathetic nervous system activation, I start finding it harder to speak because not, oh, and here's something else I was reading about. The same guy that wrote the article about the inappropriate exercise response metaphor is that when we're in that kind of panic reaction, you know how people say, and I think this relates to the tunnel vision thing too, that we can't, people go, I just can't think. I'm so anxious, I can't think. It's because the prefrontal cortex is not being accessed. You know, we're in the primal fear centers of the brain. We're not accessing our reasoning skills. And the more that we can activate that part of the brain, the more quickly we're likely to come out of that fear response. And so, you know, clearly we're not in much of a state to do a very complex cognitive task, but one of the things you can do is count backwards. So if you just in your mind start counting backwards from, you know, like the number 100, or maybe count backwards by twos or something that like, um, you know, requires that you draw on your cognitive skills. That's one of the things you could do, or some other way that you could activate that. I don't know if maybe doing math would also be supportive there. And when it comes to breathing too, the hyperventilation response that some people get with panic, that's an inappropriate exercise response. That kind of breathing shallowly from the upper chest. So the two ways to mitigate that are either to hold our breath for a while, and you know, just as long as we can comfortably, or to take deeper breaths to help regulate the breath that way. But sometimes it's harder to take deeper breaths when we're in that shallow breathing kind of state. So holding the breath for a little bit might make it so that we just naturally take a deep breath. And the other thing that Mark Tyrrell was talking about in that article is he was saying panic takes its lead from you. It's a follower, not a leader. You can be the leader. So it's like a dog barking at, a burglar is one thing. People don't usually have a problem with that, but we don't want the dog to be barking at the mailman or barking at you know, the child on the lawn or something like that. So you can train the dog and train the dog that, there are times when it might be beneficial to bark and other times when it's not in service. So we can train ourselves. And the suggestion he had was stop avoiding the situations that you associate with panic attacks. So like if somebody tends to avoid going to the grocery store because maybe they had a panic attack there once, it's like you're sort of creating these, we call it faulty pattern matching, where you start to avoid more and more of your life because it's associated with the past negative experience. So just, do those things. There was actually a really good book, and it's one of the books that helped me years ago. Very total, I think 70s, maybe self-help. It was called Feel the Fear and Do It Anyway. Does anybody remember that book? That was actually a pretty good book, but it was basically sort of a feel the fear and do it anyway. Being able to get out of that faulty pattern matching and gradually train the body to not do the panic or do the anxiety script. So, yeah, so you noticed with it was calming, you started to feel a bit drowsy. Yeah, I'm glad these feel accessible to you. They feel accessible to me as well, and I love the simplicity. Yeah, the getting back out into the world with all the changes during the pandemic. That's been a lot. People are still managing with that. Yeah. Well, so about ready to wrap up with this portion. And, I just want to say that, if there's a desire for more personalized support, I do, love to work with people to, address specific concerns, like if there's anxiety that is, kind of more global than, the panic attack experience. Hypnosis in a series or, just one-off sessions can be really valuable. So, I'd love to support you in whatever way I can. Please feel free, to reach out. It'd be great. Even if you just want to, learn a little bit more about hypnosis and how it works and, how that goes. I find that I've been just continue to expand, my knowledge about working with hypnosis. And there's so many great teachers that I've got to study with that I have some protocols that I'm working with that I just love, that are just so effective. So I'd love to be a support if I can be. So I'm going to stop recording now. And for those of you that are watching on the replay, feel free to reach out if you have any questions or you'd like to share your experience with me. I'd love to hear about it. Oops. Don't want to leave the meeting. Just want to stop the recording.